I work at a company called Made by Many, and we are based in London. They're sort of 33 people, sort of medium-sized. We're based here in Angel. If you're using iOS 6, we're based in the 17th century, so just bear that in mind if you ever come over. And we enjoy making stuff. That's our primary interest. That's what we do. That's how we work. And if we sort of test ourselves by saying, if we're not making, what are we doing? And we focus on keeping energy in the actual process of creating stuff. We have a kind of process, obviously everyone does, and I think we're going to see a lot of, in my talk, we'll see a lot of resonances with stuff that we've seen throughout the day. I think we're going to go in slightly different directions, so I hope it's not kind of going to repeat too much. We use a make, test, learn strategy, and then obviously we're really iterative. The interesting thing is I think we're really not precious about process. We are incredibly kind of slutty about process, in fact, and we pick and choose stuff that fits as and when we need it. There is no dogma involved in what we do. So the company's 5 years old, and 5 years ago it was started using a very much kind of agile development process. When that was kind of emerging as a way of creating software and escaping from waterfall kind of projects that always seem to fail. And then I joined like 4 years ago and brought along a bunch of service design ideas that I think have been incredibly informative into working with the agile process. And then over the last couple of years, we've been working very much on lean strategies to actually kind of make things work better once you've made them. So I think there's an interesting kind of dialogue between those things, and I think we're moving on. I don't think it's a fixed thing. We're adding more stuff all the time, and part of this talk is going to be about like saying that actually there are some interesting new frontiers that are challenging the way we're thinking about this. But I like this line, and it's an interesting one in terms of the fact that when I started working in a purely digital company, having worked at a service design company, LiveWork, for a long time, I sort of came along and discovered this agile process and found that it was incredibly powerful for turning service design processes into real functional pieces of artifact that people can use. So I think there's a really kind of interesting thing about this idea of two other processes or two other kind of methodologies actually converting something else into a much more powerful tool. I'm going to, excuse me. I don't know whose that was. So today, I sort of want to talk about this. There's sort of two parts, really, about this idea of a new audience. And I'm quite into the idea of the Internet of People. I was going to call it the Internet of We, but that sounds really bad. So it's this idea where we're looking now not so much as integrating with large-scale services that are delivered by big companies, and we have to integrate and create and sort of work with their legacy systems and do all that sort of stuff. There is a completely new kind of service and a new sort of design process in many ways that I like to think of as digitally native. So we are no longer having to worry about whether it works with the big process that the company already has that we're engaged with. We're able to sort of be liberated by a lot of the new sort of startup-y processes to actually sort of worry less about touch points for a start. I don't think we've mentioned touch points in ages in the office. It's sort of because these things exist in a totally digital realm. The touch point's your phone, and there may be other additions, there may be other aspects to it, but fundamentally you interact with your phone and other things happen. And I think what's really fascinating right now is we're sort of refactoring this idea of the producer and the consumer. And we've talked about this a lot today in terms of new kinds of services emerging, and I'll try not to kind of bore you with those because we've been through a lot already. And I think what's really exciting is that we're augmenting behavior, we're not trying to change behavior. And I think service design traditionally sort of said, we must change behavior, we must make things, change what everyone's doing and make it much better. I think now it's like, all right, people have behavior, but there's really interesting ways of adding layers to it. that I think is an interesting topic. I don't think it's the answer, but it's an interesting topic. And I sort of feel, and this might be a bit weird, but it's like possibly the most the new kind of startup-y style services are possibly the most interesting thing that's happened to service design since the sort of invention of call centers. There's something kind of profoundly shifting in the way we're actually interacting with the world. And a lot of it resides in this, which is a very simple thing. It comes up in sort of business model generating books all the time, but it's this simple idea of the two-sided problem, which is not uncommon in the sort of, well, it's fairly uncommon in sort of service design world, but in the world of digitally connected devices, we are dealing with it all the time, and it's actually the kind of bread and butter of what we're trying to sort of work with. So what happens is that at its core, you have a kind of product. You make a product. It's a thing. And then what we're trying to do is connect buyers and sellers, and you could wrap a service around that, and you could make that into a kind of nice-looking diagram. But what's really interesting is that you get this, when you talk to guys who run startups, they talk about liquidity. And I think that's something that agencies and businesses have never really directly addressed. And I think it's what's very interesting about what's emerging now is that you don't bother building it unless you think there is liquidity in the market, unless you think people will actually do it. There is no point in building things and then forcing them upon other people. It's similar to what Chris was saying this morning about the fact that you have to sell something. You turn it into marketing. And so I think some of the things we're trying to look at are really around where you can identify and think about services that actually are viable rather than just, because we can. And I think what's interesting about a lot of this stuff is that it turns everybody into a self-facilitating media node, which is a quote from a fantastic British philosopher called Nathan Barley. He's worth looking up on YouTube. And so on the flip side of this, I think there's a new context, and I think it's startups versus big organizations. And I think it's also a new context, which is like, is service design the new marketing, which is not going to go down well. So I think that we're sort of working in this space where big organizations are a bit adrift. They don't really know how to deal with this stuff, and startups do. And so somewhere in the middle, there's a really interesting space to operate. And I think we're really trying to kind of identify that space and work with it. So I'll give you one really good example of something that I love. If you've had the opportunity to use Halo, it's a bit like Uber Cab in the States. It's a very simple thing. It's two apps. One is on your phone, and you can say, pick me up here. One is in the cab, is in a black cab, traditional London black cab. And so what's really interesting is that I am requesting something, and somebody else is accepting something. There is an immediate sense of connection that we can make. And what's happening that's really interesting is that I am completely refactoring my relationship with the idea with a black cab. It's not the Internet of Things. I'm not arranging for an automated cab to turn up. I'm arranging for a human being to get to me, to pick me up, to take me somewhere else. There is an instantaneous relationship that is created, and it's changing the way that we think about things. It's completely sort of changed my view on how black cabs work. I use them a lot more now, which I never used to, because it's incredibly straightforward. I know where everything is. I understand what's going on. And it's refurbishing my view on what has traditionally been a really kind of, a group of people who you love to hate. They're famously racist. They're famously really aggressive. And what's fantastic about this is that the ones who have adopted this service are the ones who are not the idiots. So it's immediately created a kind of pool of people who are much more interesting, much more like happy to provide a service and actually serve you. And So I think this is a kind of, these kinds of things are where it all resides, and there are millions of them. We've talked about this like all day. Can I hire your car? Chris was talking about Whipcar this morning. Can I pay you to clean my house? There's tons of things like the Exec in the States and TaskRabbit, and services that get you to go and do something, or activate somebody in the world to go and do something for you. And I think, and the Airbnb one is obvious, but these things are incredibly disruptive, but what's fascinating is they can work at a very tiny scale. So they slip right under the radar of big organizations, and then they suddenly turn out to be a problem because adoption is a real, is viral. Whereas if startups can do that, then big business would tend to do something like this in terms of activating people. And this is a product that was created by British Gas in the UK a few years ago. It's not new, it's quite old, and I don't think it's a bad idea, but what's interesting about it is that what it's trying to do is turn the consumer in their home via a smartphone into a smart meter. And so instead of installing an object, a meter that transmits information to British Gas, what they're doing is trying to get you to be the meter reader. Now, I think it's a really interesting idea. The problem is the problem I have with it is that I don't feel like there's any real kind of permission for them to do that, and I don't feel like the value exchange is particularly beneficial to me. I might get some savings on my gas bill, but fundamentally I'm providing them with data about me, and I don't know. It's a sort of someone described it to me as a bit like a punishment, and this feels much more like a traditional kind of they provide, we consume kind of model, and it feels much more like a sort of feudal, disempowering kind of relationship. And so I think these are the old world ways of doing stuff. This is the way that big business tends to think we're going to create this really good, friendly, sensible service that people will go, wow, that's going to save me money, I'll do it. But in fact, what they're doing is they're kind of creating a sort of bureaucratic, the design is bureaucracy rather than being sort of innovative and disruptive. They're not challenging themselves, and so that's the kind of arena that I think is a really interesting place to get into when we're talking about these kind of activating products. And then let's talk about marketing, because marketing does not get it at all, does not understand what we do at all, from my experience, and they make things like this. So in terms of activating someone, what they'll try and do is create a movement. They'll try and create a utility that is completely useless. And they will create what we like to call marketing landfill. It will be stuff that tries to get your attention, and it's like they're laundering our attention. They're creating a destination that you can go to and you can kind of participate in, but actually it's a front for another service. And so, it's inherently broken, and marketeers do not know how to create engagement in a way that matters to us, and in a way that would matter to a service designer. So I know Chris said he hates marketing this morning, but the thing is that actually maybe we need to embrace marketing as something that we can help. So my observation really is that organizations need a new kind of process to create these digitally native services, and something that maybe is able to retool the marketing department, to re-educate the way that marketing departments think about the way that the company is sold, so that we start to create products that feel more like Halo and are high value and customer-centric and engaging and interesting and something you want to tell your friends about, as opposed to like a service about bread, for instance. Well, it has existed. I'm not kidding you. Got a laugh though. So brand utility is an interesting one in terms of like it's attaching a utility to a message. Let's make this cute thing that people might engage with, and then let's hopefully that will get the message across. It's like service design done by advertisers. And then we talk a lot about this idea of essential utility, which is every day. Like, what happens if we can get people to this point where there's an everyday engagement, you know, where there's something that is viable and possibly valuable to me in some way. And this stuff is the kind of, you know, is where I think service design can really help. I think what startups do really well, and I'm incredibly envious of, is that they create this idea of epic utility. And this is where it feels like magic. And I think services like Uber and Halo feel like something magical is happening that changes your entire outlook on something and makes you feel better about the world, or makes you think like the world might be a good place to live. And so, you know, I think that there is a new kind of approach that we can start to look at, which is to act like a startup. Everyone says it. It's Eric Ries's kind of mantra, and I completely respect it as a way of thinking. I think it liberates us from a lot of top-down thinking, a lot of kind of heavy sort of strategic stuff. And I think it's an approach that can work with big organizations. And I think startups tend to want to disrupt big organizations. They don't tend to want to collaborate with them and help them make something better. So I think we're trying to understand how you can create something that is valuable and interesting and can fit with an organization. And being a company that works with organizations all the time, we're in a position to actually understand the politics and the complexity of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a sort of case study-ish type thing about a service that we created for Skype, which is called Skype in the Classroom. And it originates from a brief that they gave to us, which said, we know teachers are using Skype in their classrooms. Can you help us get some really good PR stories so we can go and you know, create a microsite and then try and drive people to it and do the sort of usual kind of marketing stuff. We said, like, that's a great idea. It's really interesting. It's really exciting. But can we have a look at the problem first and look at this brief and think about how it works? And so we convinced them to give us a very small amount of money in order to go out and conduct a little bit of research with some teachers who are already doing this stuff, already using Skype in their classrooms. So what we did is we found on the internet with Google a bunch of teachers who were already using Skype to teach with. And we didn't really know anything about it, and we discovered this quite, you know, small, vibrant community of teachers who were like engaged with the thing they described as a way of making their classroom walls very thin. So projecting a Skype video on a wall of another classroom or of an expert in another place. Their kids, who are total digital natives, were completely happy to just go, this is a real experience. Now, I know it's not a real experience, so it's fair enough, but if the person is 2,000 miles away, it may never be a real experience. So I think we have to start to look at systems where we can bring people closer together doing this stuff. So we looked and found all these interesting people, and we did some testing with them. And luckily, Skype was quite good at testing. So we tested it with loads of international people. And our process is very simple. And this is really a very poor quality drawing, and I apologize for that. I should have put some really amazing system diagram in, but I didn't have one. And so this is we just tested these sketches, these ideas. We made a load of assumptions. Teachers want to share stuff. They want to find really good resources. They want lesson plans. And we made all these assumptions up, and then we went back to them and we said, are you interested in doing this? Do you think there's any value in this? And they would go, no, yes, maybe, no, yes. And so we were able to very, very quickly identify something that was incredibly simple and straightforward. And within that, we then tested with some larger groups, and we did some more boring kind of quantitative stuff, just to kind of make sure that our assumptions weren't broken, that we had a test, sort of control group to make sure it was the right way to go. And so the simplest thing is really this, and this is from the first deck that we produced. It's like just a simple diagram showing what they want to do is they want to find each other. Teachers didn't want to find each other, and one of the great examples was that we found a blog post that a teacher had written saying, I'd like to meet another teacher to do a Skype lesson, and there were 600 comments with people saying, this is my Skype name. And so it didn't take much for us to really understand that what they needed was just that, for the first moment, was to find each other. So we built something, and we built it in 5 weeks. So this is a way of us going from a point in time where we had this idea of a sort of marketing brief from Skype, and we then said, let's try something. We spent a few weeks testing something, and then we built something in 5 weeks, and we got it out there. There was no strategy. It was not necessary. We were able to reduce the time to live by testing a few things very quickly, which is a kind of possibly a new way of working. I don't know. So once we'd kind of built this very simple platform, we were able to then observe behavior. And what we do then is we move into a very data-centric world, and also just observing how people use it. So the first thing we noticed was that they were hacking their biographies on their profile pages to talk about the projects they wanted to do. So we were able to then extend the service to match with products. It was a very easy, it was a no-brainer situation. And we've observed the way that they do that. And I think teachers are a really interesting breed anyway, because they tend to be they tend to sort of do whatever they want to do, or at least try and do what they want to do. And so this is like showing the journey of it over the last, it's been sort of live for 2 years. These things take ages to bed down. They're not like, it's not just going to happen. It takes a long time to grow these things. So we started over here with like the most basic thing. We had to like try and make it look like it had loads of other features. We had to sort of like fake it so it looked interesting, because fundamentally it was just a place where you could put your bio in. And then since then we've been able to just flood it with stuff, and we've kind of extended it, expanded it. And at every stage we've used insights and data all the time to make sure that we're not doing stuff for our own vanity, for the sake of the stuff we want to build, which is a really easy trap for agencies to fall into when they work for big organizations. They've got something to prove. So we try and stick to that. It's hard not to, but you try and stick to it. And so it's gone through these massive changes. And what's really interesting about this is that doing this kind of incredibly rapid iterative release cycle is that you break the design process, which is another kind of heavyweight, front-loaded process that always weighs you down while you're making stuff. So when a designer says, oh, I think this design is really nice, you can just go, well, let's A/B test it with the existing one. So you spend a bit of time like putting a new design in, but fundamentally within a few days or within a week, you get definitive results as to whether the activity that the person wants to participate in, or what you want them to participate in, is actually being done with the new design. So it removes that kind of that sort of process of having to negotiate with what's right and what's wrong in design. And so and sort of carrying on, I'm kind of trying to give you a view of how this thing has grown and how the strategy has evolved alongside it, and how this kind of process helps us to design services that really sort of change the way we actually build stuff. So this is the kind of Yellowstone effect, which we call it, which is effectively a Yellowstone park ranger found this service and then said, I'm prepared to Skype with schools around the world. And this has been an amazingly kind of impactful project, because it opened up a completely new realm for us, which was the idea of creating a platform for other brands to coexist with us within this space, so long as they're providing educational outreach and valid educational experiences. So this kind of insight of someone like choosing, of completely organically discovering your service and then going, oh, I'll do that, is a great way of then going, well, let's build this. And so now we have 15 or so partners. We have like NASA. We released NASA being on there last week. We have Penguin Books, and I think there's a lot of really interesting things here. So NASA is the digital learning network. So we have a platform that's powered by Skype. We have NASA on there doing their educational outreach stuff. But then we have Penguin. So the relationship with Penguin is they are not an educator, but they have these educational authors. So what's happening is that Penguin perceive it as a valuable, a valuable marketing channel. They can say that it will save them money in putting some of their authors on there to do school Skype visits, to engage the kids, to understand the kids better, probably make them better authors as a result. and actually maybe shift some books. And that is not an overt part of it, but the value exchange is really interesting. There is no one is being hurt in this process. Everything is positive. So let's talk about what Skype in the Classroom really is. And I think it's a brilliant piece of strategic marketing. And so, I'm happy to confront that fact. It's also this idea of perfect storm corporate social responsibility. It puts Skype in a position where they can go, we are giving something back. Our corporation is giving something back. It's a great example of SROI, social return on investment. The ability to invest in something and see the provenance of your activity come back to pay dividends. Things that are not measurable by the bottom line. It's an interesting platform for brands. That's something we discovered, that we're happy, that brands are happy to coexist with us. They bring value and they enrich it. But primarily, it's a very rich and complex service. It's a platform for delivering services, for connecting people to do stuff together. So it's this new world of digital services that are complicated and are not straightforward. There is no straightforward, this is a service, it is service design. I don't know what this platform is. I think it might be a really good marketing tool. It possibly is. I think it makes Skype feel really good about themselves. And the side effect is you get things like this happening. So when we talk about organizational change and sort of going into offices to kind of figure out what's broken, maybe there's this opportunity where you can create these exemplar services that exist in kind of for clients that get the CEO to say things like that. I mean, it's terrifying when you hear him say that, because that's 1 million people then you've got to find. That's how does this thing grow? How does it scale? But what you're doing is you're getting buy-in from the very top, and as a result, what happens is you get them having the sort of like me services internally. You're getting separate divisions of Skype coming forward and going, we would like to have to use this. We would like to do something with this platform. We think there is value there. And so the money for building services is coming out of marketing budgets. It's no longer an experiment. This is a major component of of how they see their CSR and their for-good projects, as well as some kind of marketing channel. So we're looking at building. We're currently building one for small businesses. And we're looking at one for building. We're sort of studying and doing a bit of research about one in healthcare. So the kind of new frontier that I want to sort of raise today is this idea that as a service design company, we've got service design pretty well nailed. We understand it's a set of tools. We're obsessed with the idea of lean and customer development. We're completely kind of engaged in proper making processes like Agile. But what happens when a design agency of 33 people is asked to grow a service to 1 million people, and being funded to do so? So what happens when the design agency is, as someone I worked with put it the other day, what happens when the design agency doesn't go home? So we are engaging in a long-term relationship around this product. And we're having to do things that are very, very different from the way that agencies traditionally work. But I think that what's quite interesting about it is that unlike big organizations, we can act like a startup. But unlike startups, we already have a process. So there is an interesting space for us to get in there. We are fast and we're able. And so where does it go now? It goes into different languages. It becomes much bigger. It becomes a bigger beast. And so we then have to start figuring out how we then prime the organization to start taking this thing back over. What does that feel like? When does that happen? We don't know any of this. We don't know any of the answers, and I think that's the kind of how we discover more and more as time goes by. And it's scary. I mean, we know that we can make this product work. We know we can grow it, but we know it's not ours. So therefore, we have to think about what the future feels like when it's not ours. So I've got like 30 seconds to show you 5 things that I think are really relevant to this kind of new frontier. There's this idea of the the product half pipe. And a guy at a startup sketched this for me the other day, one of the chaps at Whipcar. He did it in the context of a startup. And it was all about how many people you have along the bottom. But what's really interesting is the idea of service design operates over here, and in its main kind of, the main tools that you use in rapidly digesting assumptions and evidence and insight and turning them into propositions. And then you start to kind of merge into an agile process, which is starting to measure stuff. So then you become incredibly data-driven. And then at this point down here, you're saying, now we need to scale this thing. So like traditionally, most places would start, most design companies would stop here. They'd go, here you go, here's a great deck, off you go, thank you. And then, we started going here to this like refining it. We've made something, we've built it, we're going to refine it and give it to you, and then off you go. Then it often would break. What we're doing now is we're saying, I'll tell you what, we'll scale it as well. And so we're having to do very, very different things. And this is, like, one of them is this, the idea of growth hacking. This is a new buzzword. It's kind of kicking around startup land at the moment. And I think it's really interesting because what it means is you have to staff up with people who really understand what running services actually means. People who can actually market services, people who can be the advocate, people who can manage, like go and negotiate with partners. I'm not in a position to go and work with Penguin every day to figure out how we're going to work together. We need someone to do it. You need someone to be the service avatar, someone who is out there and is the face of this thing, this strange hybrid entity that sits outside of the organization, but sits outside of us. It's not ours. It belongs to the organization, but we're running it. It's complicated, and you need someone who understands data. Because that's the most important thing. Because data drives process. That's what we're learning. And this kind of flow of like understanding the data, going and finding insight based on that. Why don't you want to do that? Because the data shows no one's going to that page or no one's doing this thing. Go and ask people. Then produce some design hypothesis. Then test it with more data. And then get validation. And then start again and keep going round and round. The other interesting thing we've learned is that you have to stay under the radar with the organization for as long as possible. And they are an amazing organization. There's nothing bad about them at all. But what is hard is when you're running a tiny, tiny little service in the background and you've got the behemoth PR engine going, well, we can't let you release them because we've got X, Y, and Z going out. We can't let you do that then. So then your tiny little announcements are competing with gigantic product releases because the people at the PR companies do not understand this process. So you have to educate them as well. You have to bring them on side. Or I think, which is a perfect future, is that we start creating PR companies that disrupt the PR companies. We don't need them anymore. They're fundamentally broken, and apologies to any PR people here. And then I'll wind up quickly, but there's a new sort of an idea we're kicking around because I know we're not getting into the organization like this. What we're doing is we're creating these really interesting products. They go, oh, that's really exciting. Wouldn't mind one of those. But that's the marketing department. What we want to do is we want to get over into the other sections that traditionally do not talk to each other. So we start to engage the product people. We start to engage the business people. And we talk about this idea of service design groups, so people that sit across disciplines that can support these strange, funny new entities that are somehow making marketing much more useful than it used to be and engaging customers in a different way. And like pretty much the last slide, but I think that this, for me, is the most important thing, is that strategy, I think, is something that you don't do up front. I think what you do up front is you find out and you make stuff, and then you put it out there, and you find out whether anyone gives a shit. And then you start to evolve it. And the longer you can do it for, and the longer you can not commit to this is the future of this product, the more you get opportunities to change, do different things, and invent things that people actually really need rather than just inventing kind of, amazing, beautiful ideas. That's just how I sort of feel about strategy. And so this is I'll finish on this.
In Yellowstone Park?
In Yellowstone? I bet in Maine you have a lot more moose than we do, but we do have moose. I think that is that a male or a female? Do you guys know? Yeah. And what about this one? How do you guys know the difference?
Tori, what's the difference?
That's right. The bull moose or the male has antlers and the cow moose, the female does not. So we do have some moose in the park, but not a lot.
So to finish, really, that's the point of this thing is that's really kind of, you know, amazing thing to watch. Low production values. She is effectively a girl in a hat holding up photographs, which I think is cool. But it's like it's not. It's so simple. It's really it's brilliant. And the kids don't. You know, they're into it. And this lady's comment to us was, all of my students want to be park rangers now. Which I think if you know, if you can create a service that helps kids to think like that and do something different, then you can you know, you change the world. You know, maybe. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. That was the perfect, tangible example for that pretty abstract shit I just talked about before.
No, I loved yours.
Thank you. I love yours too. So we have time for one question. Who wants to boogie?
Don't have to.
You don't have to. I mean, we have a tight schedule, yes, but good questions always beat the tight schedule.
For your Skype in a classroom, these brands, do they pay for that, or is that something that they just can
Yeah,
do?
we got paid for it.
They pay for it?
Yeah.
That was an easy question.
That was a good question. And it was the one question. No, if there's another question, please. Now everybody's getting warmed up here. This is fantastic.
Hi. If you don't own this product, you don't own this service, who does, and how do you think management of it should be going forward, or is it just an open book as far as you're concerned?
I mean, I think at the moment it's an open book. I think we're helping them to grow it. I mean, it's not, we don't have any kind of, you know, we're not precious about it. It's a tool. You know, we're passionate about it because you know, that's the way we are. But I think in terms of ownership, we have very strong emotional ownership for it. They pay us to manage it and run it and grow it and develop it. I think in the end what will happen is we will, and what we're talking about doing at the moment is trying to figure out what kind of group within Skype should take possession of this stuff going forward. At the moment they're not, you know, I don't think they have the right people in place to do that, but I think we could easily help them to do that. And they're not an organization that's stupid. They could easily handle this. It's just at the moment their world is around the product, the central core Skype product, and so thinking about this stuff is sort of abstract in some ways because this stuff lives outside. We call them service layers, so they kind of sit around the core product. And the key to this thing is that we never tried to touch the core product because that would have been impossible for us. It would have never worked. So we invented something that would sit and augment it.
So would you ever open it up to, say, for example, people working in the developing world who don't have as much access to classrooms?
Open it up to, yes, yeah, no, we're working with UNHCR right now to try and figure out a way of getting some computers in some of the biggest refugee camps in the world and getting kids in front of other kids because the average length of time that a child spends in a refugee camp is 8 years. So the more that we can pipe in from other kids in other parts of the world who can learn from them and teach them things, the better. And I think what we've always tried to do is blur the edges of what's a classroom and what's a student. It's not a dogmatic thing, it's just learning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
So.